Hello, I'm Kyle. Welcome to Give Pause Hobby, the channel where I stop to appreciate the things I love to fill my free time with. This video has been kind of a little bit of a long time coming, not just like in the planning phases, but for years now, I've been unsure to the point of mostly not doing them, how to put together top 10 lists. My issue with the top 10 list in something that's going to continue, year after year, is that by their very nature, they are at odds with what I'm trying to be better at, which is have games that are not new, but games that I love that keep coming back to the table, and then the games that are new that are coming in, whether from the old crowdfunding campaigns from years ago or the new hotness that I just can't, not get anymore. And if you kind of like extrapolate that over the course of several years, you begin to see the problem with the top 10 list. Because if you're being honest with games that have some sort of cornerstone impact on your hobby board gaming, then your list is going to be maybe not filled, but at least partially taken up by these like immovable objects. But if you're being, more eyes to the wind, like seeing what's new, what's coming in, what gets you excited, then you're not really paying credence to the games that really led you there. And now this obviously, I'm not talking about like top 10 games of 2022 or whatever, but this is like top 10 games ever, which for a number of years I put together. This was like my revelation that I had when responding to Max over at Table Knots with my video up here in the corner about me responding to an old top 10 list that I had, and just kind of like seeing where those games kind of like shake out these days. Now, if I was better at doing an annual top 10 list, that would have been different, because I could have said like, oh, it went up 2 positions or down 5 or it's off the list or whatever. But since I really haven't kept up with top 10 lists, I just kept coming back to the fact, and I was like, well, this is a really important game and it's still really important to me, even if it's not on my like radar, so to speak, my top 10 list. And it got me thinking, like, there has to be a better way to do this. And there is, at least for me. I'm not here to yuck anybody's yums. I know there's a lot of top 10 lists out there, and I do enjoy watching other people's. I just personally don't jive with the idea, because I want things to be more longevity. And so even though I did not get the sports watcher gene from my parents, as I say, because the family loves watching a bunch of different sports, and I could not possibly care less about sports. I like playing them, but I do not like watching them. But from sports is where I got this idea, and that's the Hall of Fame model. Exactly for these very reasons. Let's take baseball, for instance, which has been around for a little bit. There are amazing people right now, athletes that are playing baseball. But if you held yourself to saying like, well, who are the top 10 baseballers ever? And then you had to put, Hank Aaron or whoever against whoever is playing baseball now, because I don't have any names. Hank Aaron was the first of all baseballers' names that come to mind. It would be really challenging, if not literally impossible, because you would have 10 slots to both, again, honor the like founders or like some of like just the benchmark players in history, and also have your like thumb to the pulse of where the game's at now. It would be just like totally haphazard. And there would be these meta conversations about like, ooh, this top 10 list has like 5 old players and like 5 new ones. This one only has 1 old player and 9 current play. Like it breaks down, because it's too much limitation. Limitation is a good thing if you've ever done creative writing, if you've ever done composing. I buck up against this when I'm doing videos. When I have limitations, I do better than if I just say, I'm going to talk about something. Peek behind the curtain, all the takes before I started this one. So if there's no limitations, then you're kind of like paralyzed under this, what direction do I want this list to go? So there's the preamble. Here's the plan. The Kyle Frost Give Pause Hobby Hall of Fame is going to be 2 games each year. And at the end of that year, I'll talk about those 2 games that I chose. They don't have to be games that were released then. They could be games that are way older, but they're just not, and they don't even necessarily have to be like new to me games. Like a lot of us have experienced, like, we're finally getting around to this old classic. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm just saying, for whatever reason, and it can be a variety of them, these 2 games were the top 2 games of that previous year. And I'm excited to see what reasons I come up with for them. Just as excited as I was to put all these together, because what today is Hall of Fame -2. That's stupid. So today is like Give Pause Hobbies Hall of Fame way back machine. And then there'll be another video of the way back machine. And the way I'm going to break this up is I really kind of like broke into the board game hobby. Like 2012 was a seminal year, and I'll get to, you know, why and for what reasons. But that's really where I became like tapped into the hobby space. But then another really important year was 2018, because that was the first year that on January 1st, I started tracking on BG Stats app. Shout out to BG Stats. It's a data geek's best bud. And I'd seen people posting, they're like, what I did this year. And I'm like, man, how are all these people so good at putting together these like charts, which I'd done for various things over the years. And they just look so professional and also identical. And I found that out, and my mind was blown, and I've tracked everything ever since. I've talked in other places about how I track even things like hobbying. DBMP is what I call it. So design, build, model, paint, anything. That includes prototyping, that includes modeling, like putting minis together, painting them. But I also include on there DBMP, like my kids' swing set, or when we did pavers, paver patio out in the back, because obviously those are not games, but they're taking up the same kind of space in my life. It's the same thing that the Give Pause Hobby name is referencing, that this is all coming from the same like well of bandwidth and time and attention. And I just think it's fun to say, like, I have played this game longer than I took to build a swing set by myself. So that's just me. But I've also been tracking light games, which are where my kids and I, either one or both of them, we play Dada games, Mama and Dada games off the shelf, and we just play with them as toys. As like I've said before, games are nothing but boxes of toys with rules. And when I grew up, as I was growing up, I was playing a bunch of games that my mom would get through Discovery Toys, because she was a vendor of that. And my brother and I had no idea of the rules. And we knew some games, and more as we grew older. But there are some games that we never learned the rules of. We just made them up, and we just used the pieces to kind of play with. And they're just like thematically linked to the big board that we put on the table and just had some fun. So anyways, BG Stats app 2018. So that is, we're going to be doing the before BG Stats. That's the way back machine. And the after BG Stats, that's the way back machine. And then the third video down the line will be me catching up with the 2022 Hall of Fame entries. So without any further ado, let's talk, because we have 6 years to get through here, because even though I said it starts in 2012, the first year is pre-2012. So this is kind of encapsulating everything that came before, as the name would imply. And to start off with, this is the singular game that threw off my top 10 list for the first years when I was really getting into like BG Stats, and way before I had a channel, but I was watching people's top 10. I was like, what would my top 10 be? And this one always kind of stuck in my craw because I didn't know how it fit in, and that's Magic the Gathering. Because as a child of the 90s, with parents who believed the Satanic Panic and all that, I was not allowed to collect or to really play Magic cards. But when I got to college, holy moly, Ravnica, like OG first Ravnica came out, and it just like lit my brain on fire, having these 5 different mana archetypes that are melded together in these 10 different combinations for the guilds. And that was it. Boom, the magic spell was was cast, and for the next 4 years, it was like the thing that my friends and I did. At some points, like to being a problem. Like I was only thinking about magic cards, and I never really got into the serious side of magic. We did lots of duels, my friends and I who were living together, but we also did lots of three-player, like Piranha or Anti-Piranha. Our favorite was Star. If you don't know Star, it's 5-player, so it's multiplayer Magic, which I know for some people is like sinful, but I think multiplayer Magic is fantastic. And in Star, you win by taking out the 2 people opposite you, which is tricky because these people, your side, they're like your allies, but each one of them is taking out one of your enemies but trying to save the other one. And then your 2 enemies are trying to take you out and one of your allies but not the other one. So it's just this like personal, like political landscape. Anyways, Magic is fantastic. When I moved on to Michigan State University, I made a decision. I was like, I'm not gonna, if Magic comes to me, great, but I'm not going to go seek out people to be as dedicated as I have been in my undergrad. And I've played only a little bit since, but I've been chasing the high of that game, with the caveat of I'd love a game that doesn't require as much on the back end, which is why board games have been so fantastic, because you can have a table nanny who learns the rules, teaches them, and you can play. And if you really want to get into the nuts and bolts of Magic or any other collectible card game, it requires all that dedication offline. So Keyforge, the like re-release of Keyforge, I'm really putting some hopes into. But anyways, Magic the Gathering was my first of the Hall of Fame pre-2012 edition. The other one, Star Wars Epic Duels. So this is the precursor. This is the original game that led to Unmatched, the wildly successful and popular game from Restoration Games. But Star Wars Epic Duels was kind of a little bit janky, but kind of a little bit amazing. Also, when I was in undergrad, this guy doing his doctorate, he told me about how he was like a moderator on a site where people would submit fan-created like factions or decks or whatever for this Star Wars dueling game, and I'm like, what? Because I was playing Magic at the time, and there were some things about like co-designing cards online on different like Magic fan websites. But like in terms of submitting something for other people to play for a game that's out there, it just didn't make any, like I would never make a deck of just like, oh, you want to play against my like homemade Magic deck? Like that thought never crossed my mind. And so it sort of like, again, blew it open a different way. And so I tracked down a copy, which is a little bit hard to find because it was out of print for a while. And again, the same people I was just like slinging Magic with day in, day out, it really resonated with us. It also really resonated with the like kind of side of my brain where I needed to track everything. So I went through every deck and I totaled up how many attack and defense and total values, how many different like special cards, which cards you needed to pay attention to. Like in the Han and Chewie deck, if you didn't get your bowcaster ability off before Chewie dies, you're probably not going to win the game. Just like mathematically, you might not have enough damage to put into the other player to take their hero down. And so I can't remember how many, I think they're like 12 or 20 or I don't know, there was a pretty decent number of characters in there, and you would just like mash them up together. Doesn't matter what era it is in Star Wars, just like in Unmatched, doesn't matter. You could have a T-Rex versus I don't know, Medusa. and it was super fun. I think there's a lot of, like I said, a little bit of jank. The pieces were not great. The boards were super boring. But the game, I mean, this speaks to what Restoration Games does. The game underneath all that was solid, and they have polished it to a fine, like bright, shining. What am I saying? I don't know. I'm just gonna end that sentence. So, anyways, 2012. How are these games doing now? This part will not be in the normal Hall of Fame for the previous year, because that will be much closer to us. Right now, I have the benefit of hindsight, so I can look to see. It's also, I chose these differently than I will in the future, because I was able to look at the past over a decade at what I've been playing, as opposed to looking just at that 1 year and be like, what are the 2 games that really made the biggest impact? But figured take advantage of it while I have the opportunity. So Magic, am I still playing it? No. I almost did with, what was it called? That Jumpstart, where you have the 2 things and you put them together, until I found out that, what was the deal breaker? There's something that, like, they didn't have a label at the bottom of like where they're coming from. So I had this grand idea of like, I was just gonna kind of collect a bunch of Jumpstart, and then my friends who are like lapsed Magic players, we could just be like, all right, choose 2 archetypes, shuffle them together, and treat it essentially like, that game that I'm Smash Up, and then take them apart after you're done. But there wasn't anything like, Keyforge really sort of like pulled the rug out from under me on terms of like what you can expect from card games, because it has everything. Like on the bottom of the card, it has like the name of the deck, and it needs to, because it is from that one deck. It just sort of blew my mind that Split Second or Jumpstart, which seemed like Magic's version of Smash Up, just took like, it didn't employ that basic thing. Like imagine if Smash Up didn't have little logos for each of the different houses. You're just like, go through and like make sure you take the ninjas out. Like it wouldn't be the end of the world because they look different, but like why would you not do that? Anyways, the new Jumpstarts might be different, but I was gonna play that, and instead I'm just like still chasing down games that are like Magic but not. Star Wars Epic Duels, no, I sold it, but I do play Unmatched, and I'm looking forward to playing more when I have co-op or solo available. So 2012, the big year where it all started, and it all started with Lords of Waterdeep. This game I remember seeing somewhere and saying, wow, this looks like really interesting. Having played D&D a bunch growing up, but not really seeming like it was leaning super heavy into the lore. Lots of fun wooden components. Picked it up, having never like tried it out, because demoing things back then was like way different than today. And that 2-week tour with the guard band, it got so much play. We played at least 1 or 2 games, if not more than that, every single night. Usually I was teaching I was just playing like game after game after game of like new players, to the point where eventually it was just people had played multiple times, and there were some times when I wanted to go to the pool or whatever, and so I was like, hey, can I play Waterdeep with some other people? And they were even teaching other new players, so I was building new teachers to teach the game. It just like made it through the whole band, and we all played it. And that again was like the impetus in hobby games, and the reason, not just like how amazing it was that so many people of so many different walks of life could get around the table on this one game, more so than anything I'd played previously. The one thing was the variance from game to game. There were some games where certain buildings came out and our top score was like 200 or above. And other games where we couldn't even crack 3 digits. And just based on, what the quests were out there, but really what buildings hit the market and which ones people built, Lords of Waterdeep is still just like a towering achievement in the worker placement game. I for sure still play that one. I'm just going to tell you right off the bat. The other one for 2012 is Forbidden Island, and this also switched on my hobby game brain in a different way, which was a quick, engaging co-op. Again, being somewhat new to the space, that was something I really didn't have a lot of experience in either. That has such a good rule set that it really accommodated for us making stuff up. We came up with different layouts for the island. We came out with different roles, and we printed them off and had them laminated at FedEx, Kinko's, and they're still in my game box. I still always use the layouts of the island if it's with someone who's played before, and then every now and then we'll use those other roles too. So that was my first ever experience with play testing and sort of like balance adjusting things. But just from a game enjoyment, even without those other things. It's just really fun. Like this like, I think before I had words to describe it, called back to those, like, you know, games are just toys with rules. That concept from my growing up, because those fourth, like, artifacts you're going after, they like don't match at all. There's like the Death Star one, the see-through like fire one, which is like hard, and the other ones are kind of soft. There's like the Sphinx and then the cup. And they're just like these bold colors. And again, one of them is see-through because it's fire. But they're so like weird, and they don't really go into what they are, what they do, aside from they're really important. And lets your brain kind of fill in the gaps. Same thing with all the locations. They're just like these evocative pictures and names. And then when you flip them over and it's like the underwater side, it's just, I really want to play Forbidden Island again. I haven't played in a little while, but it's for sure still in the collection. And I'm really looking forward to, I think it's going to be a great one for family games, but even, you know, just me and Kate, if we want to play co-op game that doesn't take long to set up, is quick, is fun, Forbidden Island, still playing it. Totally solid. Moving on to 2013, Forbidden Island's older sibling, Pandemic. So I played this for the first time on the OG version with the wooden cubes and the wooden like pawns. And again, it really opened up my mind to like what was available in the space. And I remember thinking Forbidden Island was great, but Forbidden Island didn't seem like the sort of thing you would gather around the table to play like in an evening, like I'd experienced with Lords of Waterdeep. So then when a friend said, oh, I have this Pandemic games by the same people who did Forbidden Island, and he explained like the background, I was like, you know, this is 2013. Years before we would all experience it way too closely. And I was like, that sounds really interesting. And sure enough, it absolutely was. And 2013, where I played it first, but it came back really in the next year when I was living with one of my best friend, and we played a ton of games together. And that's when I had my own copy with the cubes that everyone has now, the see-through ones, but then also On the Brink, but then In the Lab, which I will go down swinging, saying if I had to choose between those two, I would get In the Lab, because I think that even though On the Brink brings the purple disease, which is awesome and I love it, In the Lab undoes my least favorite thing about Pandemic, which is players just like walking around like trapper keepers full of like cards, and it allows you to spread that out over all the operations of the lab itself, which gives different players other like role opportunities if they want to just be the one kind of doing the crunching the numbers over there and moving stuff around while the others are gallivanting around the globe. But yeah, my least favorite part is when you're like, all right, I have 4 of one thing and 3 of another, or like 3 whatever or 3 and 3 like. I haven't played Pandemic in actually a little while, like Disease Pandemic for previously mentioned reasons. But I hate it when you have like the 2 things. Like everyone kind of has like the 2 they're going for. We'll see what the game world gives me. And then the game world's like, well, here's 1 of each. And you're like, well, this is terrible. Yeah, but Pandemic, still play it. However, nowadays, if I'm playing Pandemic, it's playing Pandemic Fall of Rome. Before that, I did really enjoy Iberia for the change of pacing and the different, like the Railmaster one was super cool. But yeah, just the whole actual COVID pandemic has sort of thrown some cold water on that whole idea for me. But Fall of Rome is awesome. And that's sort of why I don't have a firm grasp on how many cards you need to cure a disease, because you don't have a set number of cards you need to cure a barbarian horde. It's different for each of the different colors, but it's super fun. So Pandemic, awesome as a genre, not as awesome for the actual one that this one was. The other one in 2013 is Roll Through the Ages. So in the same setting as like we had like our main dish Lords of Waterdeep, and then Forbidden Island, and then our main dish Pandemic, and then Roll Through the Ages. This was the one we played so much at lunches or practice breaks at the School of Music. And again, I guess I should just like say, like hit the button for like, it switched my brain on for like this concept in hobby games, because I was a hobby baby at the time. And what it really illuminated was how interesting a game can become when you have a set number of actions, but you randomly limit them to only certain ones depending on the turn. If Roll Through the Ages, you just took the rolling part out, and every turn you got to choose what actions you did, like just do however many number of cities you have, do that many actions, just choose them from a list. It would be terrible. It would be not fun. Everyone would have their like build specs, or like their build order, and they would go for that, and every now and then they might go for something different just because like, oh, I'm gonna try something different this time. But in like a game where you have 100% control over something like that, means that you are going to exhaust the options really quickly. Even though there are technically lots of options, your play style is probably only going to want to do 1, 2, or maybe 3 of them. But Roll Through the Ages, or card-based randomization, or whatever the randomizer in the game is, the reason it's so brilliant is because it takes those options and it limits them randomly. So you say, all right, all I need is builders. That's all I want to do this next turn. I want to finish up the Great Pyramids so I can do that before anybody else. And the dice go, cool, I got a lot of grain for you, or whatever it is. And then you have to figure out, what are you going to do? Are you going to keep rolling and keep taking those losses from losing the dice to try to get the workers you need? Or are you going to pivot to a different strategy? And I just think it's a really cool game. I've never played the Iron Age expansion, but I have played Roll Through the Ages recently with Kate, and it super holds up. It's a really quick playing game. Again, there's some like drama and a little bit of arc going on, especially if you like are getting into the combative, like going after the wonders. There's also like a simple, I can't remember if it's in the rule book or if there's some suggested online, of like just not showing the other person your wonders portion, so they don't know. And I can't remember if that's actually in the rule book or a variant or an online recommendation, but it's like super stressful because you have no idea how close you are, to a wonder compared to them, or if they're even going for the same wonder or wonders at all. But yeah, it's, I guess you would know because they would put workers in, you just don't know where they're going. But anyways, a Roll Through the Ages, still great. Not playing it nearly as much as I was back then, but that's because I'm not a doctoral college student with a bunch of time on his hands. All right, moving on to 2014. So I mentioned this is the year that I was living with my best bud, and we were doing a lot of games, and this is one of them, Sentinels of the Multiverse. The taking the co-op thing and multiplying it by a bunch of options, the different like heroes and the different villains. But what was really interesting to me is how there's also the environment. So there's this like other variable that's in there as well, that depending on which one you're playing can be all negatives, can be some negatives, some positives, can be mostly positive. So I don't know if that are mostly positive, but anyways, there's a mixture, and it going against a certain villain on this environment versus this one makes for a completely different game. And then obviously, this environment with this villain versus this villain, like, or whatever heroes you're doing, I don't need to explain how variety works, but apparently I just did. So it's funny because I've done this in other areas of my life as well. For a while I buck against an idea because I just don't something doesn't sit well with me. And for the longest time, the artwork of Sentinels just like didn't quite sit. I didn't get like the original Kickstarters when it was going on, even though the next one I'm going to talk about was a massive Kickstarter one. So I wasn't foreign to that concept, but I saw it come and go, and I got it later on, like once it was just in the stores, because I had heard enough people say like, this is really interesting because it's so cool how these different, decks, they're catered to each hero, how you combine those against a villain and in the environment. We put in a lot of time. Now, as 2 players, we did find out that the game is not tuned to actually 2-player games. So sometimes we would have either a dummy 3rd player, and we would just like come to consensus of like what's the best thing from their hand that we would just like lay face up on the table just to help out our 2 guys when we were kind of learning the game. Then once we like had the game rules like down pat, we would 2-hand, so we would each have 2 heroes just every time. And so we got through like playing a lot of them. It's a really bummer that I didn't have BG stats running back then, because I would have loved to see, how many games I played with all the different heroes going all the way back to then, because I unfortunately only have like 1 or 2 games that are in it. And it's just recently, after I got the giant box, which like in multiple Leader Games chats, they've talked about how a lot of times like the big box purchases, you're just buying a coffin, or like a mausoleum for this game. It fits everything. And in the case of Sentinels of the Multiverse, it fits everything, and it's great. It has their own little drawers. It's really like thematic and cool. But it's like a cornerstone of my like wall of games now. And there are things to the point where like there are a couple things on top of it. And sure, I could move them, and I have. But as opposed to other games, you're like going through the list, you're like, oh, zoop, I'm going to play this. You have to take that into account, as well as, I brought it to a friend's house who lives 4 hours away. So when I was going to drill, instead of bringing like a little bag of a couple different games, I like put the big Oblivion box in my back seat, and when I brought it in, there's like, what? But we played against the like the multi-villain Ennead. Why is that? I don't know. I think that's what I don't know. But we got our butts kicked both times. So I have played it somewhat recently. I do want to get back into playing it again, just because I've got so much of it. I think I have everything but like 1 expansion and like a handful of the promos. I don't have all of those, but I have pretty much everything else. And it's still, I haven't played it that much recently, so I can't like say for sure it's 100%, but like it's for sure still in the collection. It's not going anywhere, and I really enjoy the game. Now the next one is not still in the collection. That got sold off, and that is Myth. This was like the first just like explosion, like Kickstarter explosion that I had, where every day it seemed like there was another update coming out, and it was a new thing, like a new stretch goal that was unlocked. And it had like the base box of stuff, which is already a bunch of minis and tiles for it's like a deck building dungeon crawler co-op experience, and the main box, and then there's like another box of like all the expansion, not even expansion, but stretch goal stuff. And I went in and I got other expansions. Down the road, I did get the Journeyman Kickstarter as well, which if you've part of that or followed that along, that's a whole to-do because the company went bankrupt and got bought out by someone. So like I still have stretch goals that are forthcoming that I guess I'll just sell those off piecemeal because I sold off the whole rest of the thing, a little whiles back. But this game, we didn't honestly play it that many times. It was a little clunky. I could see the allure to it because I did not quite understand. At this point, I was pretty firmly like on board for the board game experience. So I was a little bit taken aback by how closer this hewed to the role-playing experience, because it's the game is doing like the GM part kind of, but it is not like exactly catered to like you do this and then turn the page and you do this and this. Like there are times you just get to choose what quests you go on, and then sometimes the quest gives you this thing, and then you plug and play which enemy like type you want to be the main ones in the game, and then there's like the character building part, and there's the deck building aspect of it, and this is a really cool system that had a lot of promise, but again, gameplay wasn't really why it's on the list. Is the modeling part. I hadn't done modeling since 10 years before that, and when I was playing 40K in high school, and Myth really kind of like reawoken that like part of the hobby for me to say like this is super fun. And I didn't paint the whole thing, but I had, that was the intent. Excuse me. Apparently, I need a little bit more sleep. But the ones that I did, I think I got some pretty good results on, and I was excited about how things are going. I was kind of learning, like getting back a few skills. Paints had evolved a little bit by that point, but stay tuned for the other return of hobbying later on in this series. So anyways, that one I do not have anymore. I don't play anymore because it's not in my collection. And honestly, if it was, I don't know that I would necessarily be getting it to the table, because I have enough things that are, expansive, whether like one-shot experiences or like, lots of different things in a campaign that are a little bit enough more hand-holding that I would guarantee that it would actually happen. Myth, I feel like, is a really nice combination of some like tactile tabletop aspects, but also like the open-endedness of like a role-playing game. And so for the people who those two things can like mesh together well, I'm sure it's just like would be a dream, but not quite for me. But it doesn't change the fact that it like reawoken the hobby side. So boom. 2015. Now at this point I was done. Sorry, just kicked the camera. I was done with college, so I was in Minnesota with Kate, and we were living together. And so the games that I was new to the area, so I didn't have this like friend group from college, but we were sort of getting to know like what games and what activities, like what fun stuff we want to do after work. And one of the games that I heard about and was perfect because it was a 2-player game, which really bizarrely, looking back, it was amazing. I didn't really hear that much about 2-player games when I was living with one other person that last year at Madison, and it would have been perfect because we were 2 people and guys who liked learning new rules and just going head to head and just like duking it out. And I somehow just like sort of missed that. Like I didn't get into Netrunner at the time when Netrunner was like really taking off with someone who had played Magic. Like looking back, I'm like, what am I doing? Or what was I doing? But anyways, I found this 2-player game, and it's the Risk Star Wars, and for me, the Black series, or I think that's what it's called. It's really not that much of a Risk game. It is to a certain extent, and it just seems strange. Like they put that name on just to that's a household name. People know Risk as like a thing that exists in the world. But what it really is a re-implementation of the Queen's Gambit, which was all about like the Clone Wars, and it was a tabletop game that was on like multiple levels. Like you had your troops that were like on different floors, and you had I've never played that one, so I can't speak to the specifics, but I know it was pretty well. It's sort of like Star Wars Epic Duels, like a little bit of jank, but like lots of love. And then this one came out, and it's all about the the Battle of the Death Star, like above Endor. And so you have in the middle the Death Star, like a little mini, and then all the different ships. You have like a bunch of TIE fighters and a Star Destroyer, and then B-Wings, X-Wings, and Y-Wings coming from like the jump ships for the rebels. And then on the 2 sides, you have this like track just getting to the shield generator. They just rolling dice to like slowly make your way up that way, because you need to drop the shield generator before you take out the Death Star. And then on the other side, you have Luke and Darth Vader who are dueling. And you're just slowly whittling down the health of the other one there. And if you can make it to the end, kill the other one, or redeem Vader as an option, then you get like this big boon to the rest of the game. So you have these three things that are going on. And again, sort of like roll through the ages, you have to like make your plans, your like strategic outlook, but then also your tactical decisions, because when you draw your hand, you might not have the option of the thing you want, or you don't have as many of them. Now you always have at least two options. You draw a card and it's got like ship attack, like X-Wing attack, or Luke attacks, like or whatever. Or sometimes there's three. And it's super fun. Like really, really fun. And I have this this video from way back then. We're down to where Kate was playing the Rebels and I was the Empire, obviously, and it was to a point where she had a single X-Wing who was close enough to take a shot on the Death Star, and she had just dropped the shield. I think she had two actions, and she like dropped the Death Star shield and then had this one shot with one X-Wing, and so she only got to roll one die. And I can't remember on X-Wings, I think they hit on a 4+, maybe a 3+, no 5+, I don't know, something. And it's been a while since I played it. Oh, I think 4+, because then Y-Wings are 3 and 2. Well, it doesn't matter. And she had one die roll, and we had like a dice tower, and she like dropped it through, and I like narrated the stakes, like this is Luke like flying in on the Death Star, and the die just comes up and it's like a 1, and it's like a total miss, and she's just like, no. So it's down to that last thing, which I mean my next turn I would have swarmed in and just like wiped that X-Wing off the map. And if you ever lose all your ships as the Rebels, like you just lose the game. But yeah, super fun 2-player game. And if you're at all interested in it, I remember when I read about it, they're like, yeah, the Black Series is what you want, because the retail one just like sucks in comparison. The board is like junky. There's not minis for like the Millennium Falcon, the Star Destroyer, and the Death Star. Like, yeah, the Black Series is like just beautiful. The other one that year, totally different, Spyfall. Now this is funny enough. When I was in college and I was learning these different like board games, I really wasn't jiving with like the party or like the high player count games, even though I had that like resource at my disposal of like people who probably would like to do something fun like that. But this was one of the early, I was late to the shut up and sit down train. And this was my like first time I like listened to them, like, this sounds amazing. And it is, with a couple caveats. One, I cannot recommend enough. I don't know which one it is, but look around on Board Game Geek and find a file, or I'm sure there are multiple at this point, where people have put all the locations on different things you can print out. The one I have, it takes the time to actually like, it's like 2 columns of locations on each one, and they've randomized where they're at. So if you're looking at your like upper left corner one and it's airplane, if someone else is looking at the upper left corner of theirs, it is not airplane. So you can't like meta the game and be like, oh, they're looking up there, so it must be one of those ones. Yeah, I took that and I laminated it on different like color construction paper, and even have a little white section at the bottom for dry erase, like if we want to do real scoring. But it is, I played this one actually recently, and over this past summer, and it was still fun, but having one rule book that's just like open to the spread of all the different locations, it just is brutal for the person who's the spy, having to like secretly kind of like peek over and hope no one else notices. It's just not fun. So that unlocks a totally different game. So please, if you're interested in Spyfall, or if you've got one and you're like, why is this game not as fun as it should be, try that out. The other thing is, this opened my eyes to some play groups are just not fun, or at least are not well suited for certain games. And I had an experience where this one group, they like they got all wrapped up in this awful realization. They're like, hey, you know what's cool? All of us are looking at a picture of where we're at, and the spy isn't. So what if we just asked questions like, shirts, orange or blue? Or like these stupidly cryptic things are essentially just like purity tests. Like, hey, are you looking at the picture I am? Because if not, you're the spy. And I was like, come on, that's not the game. That's just dumb. And so that came up in the game, and like we kind of like scoffed at it a little bit and like wrinkled our brows, but like didn't really have like the right to say, or the you know, feel like we had like the rules behind us say like that's not something you can do. Maybe that is, I don't know, but we like the game kind of limped on afterwards. We're like, yeah, that sucked, like let's not do that. And then some people were like, oh well, it's not a really good game if there's just like an obvious strategy you can't use. I'm like, that's not an obvious strategy. Like an obvious strategy is something that's like within the bounds of the game. An obvious strategy to like win at bowling would be like to kick the other person's bowling ball as soon as they like try to bowl it. And you're like, whoop, you got a scratch or a gutter ball. Like that's not a strategy. That's just you cheating. And that's what that is. We can all agree that was just cheating. And if you're really miffed about like, oh, well, I can't cheat in this game, be like, sorry, I guess not. But then after that, like that was bad enough. But the game after that was, this one was more of an honest mistake, and just like, again, you gotta kind of choose the people for this game. We were at a grocery store. They were asking the questions, like one of the classic ones is like, are you here for like business or pleasure? Or some variation of that. And someone was like, you know, kind of like, do you enjoy what you're doing here? And the guy was like, yeah, I love it. And all of us who are at the grocery store is like, what? I mean, because the magic of one of these games is you need to give enough information to show the other people that you are on the same page, but you can't give so much that you give it away to the spy. And that's the magic of it. When the secret sauce is that challenge. And so we're like, what is this guy talking about? So, you know, comes around, we're able to ask him a question again, and they drilled down some other follow-up question about like, you know, their enjoyment, their supposed enjoyment. And he's like, yeah, I like love what I'm doing or whatever. And we're just like, okay. And someone's like, you're the spy. And it was like unanimous, like boom, because the actual spy is obviously going to vote yes all the time, because they're like, hey, it's not me. Great. Seems like a spy. And he's obviously not the spy, because the other spy voted for him, and immediately was like, ha ha ha, where were we? and we're just like, what? And the guy was like, what if I love my job? And we're like, okay, what were you doing? He was like, I was a bagger, like a grocery bagger. And we're like, my brother in board games. Like, we're not here to like tone police how people approach their lives and their jobs. Like, I'm not here to say anyone in any job has more or less right to be, you know, fulfilled and happy with what they do. Like, far from it. But you are in a game where you're trying to convey to other people that you know where we're at. You know it's a grocery store. 99 times out of 100, people are not going to look at grocery store trips as like, woohoo. And honestly, like, even people who do jobs they love, like, there are days where it's like, yeah, job's kind of a grind. Like, if you're playing a game where you're trying to make it clear you know what's going on and you have a job as what you're doing, you are not like a theme park attendee or whatever. I think it would behoove you to give a little bit of a sense like, another day, am I right? And he was like, nah, I love it. I'm thrilled to be here. And anyway, so we stopped playing Spyfall after that, because that was like a 1-2 punch of like, this isn't the right group. All right, last one for today, because we'll get to why. Oh yeah, Star Wars, Risk Star Wars. I have played that somewhat recently. Still awesome. Spyfall, pretty good. Depends on the group again, and we weren't playing with the printout things, and that totally tanked it for me personally. But 2016, we have a couple of Kickstarter. This is when Kickstarter was just like boom, 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 boom in Kyle's life. So we had Among the Stars and Above and Below. And these are both solid games. I haven't played Among the Stars in a while. I've thought about it recently and talked about it with the person that I remember the most playing this with our friend, and Kate is 3 players, played like 3 games back to back, and where in the first game we just decided the energy cubes were named gloobs, and he has since bought his own copy of the game, and when he teaches it, they are also gloobs. We haven't played in a long time, but I imagine when we do, because Kate and I talked about it recently, they will be gloobs again. This is, again, click the button, kind of opened my brain up to part of hobby games where not everything, a game that has lots of things you can get, like Sentinels of the Multiverse, just made better by having more options, is not the case for Among the Stars. And I just kept like adding more expansions to it when they came out, and I subsequently kickstarted them as well. And it got to the point where it watered down like the thing that makes that expansion interesting. There were just too few of them in the pool that you didn't get to experience it. And I know the rule book says like you're supposed to go through and make sure that certain ones are in, certain ones are out. But I've always gone to the mindset of I'm just going to put too many cards in the deck, and it's going to be much skewed more towards tactics than strategy. Because pro tip for me at least, anytime I can adjust a game or just get a game that's more this way as opposed to the other, that's more towards tactics, I am either personally going to feel less bad about knowing more about the game and therefore informing my decisions versus the people I maybe just taught, or with at least knowing some of my friends, I'm going to be less liable when they inevitably be like, well, the guy who taught us the game knows the game. And I'm like, okay, I'm not allowed to have good ideas and make good plans. But like, yeah, it's more tactical if you don't know exactly like, oh, well, I know that there are 3 of those cards, or like if that's in here, this other one isn't. Like, I'm just gonna remove that. So I just shuffle them all together. And it's a super fun spatial, putting together like your space station and some really interesting ways of like having how the things combo, and yeah, super fun. Haven't played in a while, but want to again, so that's a good sign. Above and Below I have played somewhat recently, and that was a really wonderful, just like way before this term was thrown around or I knew anything about it, just like cozy game, like cottage core, like going through reading the things. Obviously it's competitive, but just like reading the other person's entries and then like having them go through the decisions and rolling dice and making your little village with different people. Yeah, super fun. Near and Far, I also have down the road. I haven't played Now or Never, but Near and Far has some really cool stuff to it and like more kind of like crunch. We just haven't played as much, but Above and Below, we do like quite a bit and have played recently. So overall, like most of the games in these years so far are games that are still in rotation, or if they're not in rotation, they've been in discussion and probably will get into rotation again soon. Funny story, because I know you math whizzes out there, like, or just good memory whizzes, like, wait, he said 2018 was where BG stats, and it seems like he's wrapping up, and that's because in 2017, again, this is all in hindsight, like now Kyle looking back on like past Kyle, I don't know what to tell you. I just like don't have anything for that. I don't. 2017 is when our daughter was born, so maybe that played into it, I guess. But I just don't like. It was before BG stats, so I can't rely on that. And all the rest of them, I was able to like pretty easily and like quickly. Like, oh well, this game, especially when I opened up to 2 games a year, because when it was originally just 1. Because obviously this is twice as much work, but it's more fidelity for that year. And I'm able to really be honest and like get the games that deserve to be in there. Or in this case, say, I don't know. So 2017 is just the mystery year. I played some games, but apparently none of them made any impact. So ends the before BG stats years, the way back machine. So this is a really long episode, way longer than anything I have put out recently, but next one will be shorter because it's only 2018, 19, 20, 21, just those 4, and then 2022 will be another video after that, and then beyond that, each year at some point I will talk about my 2 the biggest impact games of the previous year, and it'll just keep getting added to this list. And I'm really excited about that, as opposed to looking back to old lists and being like, what an idiot. Like, I would much rather have this model where I look back to old years, and even if they're games like Myth that I'm not playing anymore or don't even own anymore, I can think back and be like, oh yeah. Which I guess, like, that's totally a mindset thing. I could look at a top 10 list and have the same response that I'm talking about here. But for whatever reason, the way my brain is wired up, it doesn't. Top 10 lists are just stressful and at odds with themselves, I feel. And I am not going to do it. So there is the first installment of the Give Pause Hobby Hall of Fame. Thanks for sitting through a bunch. If you made it to this point, sound off down below with what your earliest hobby game was. I told you mine, Magic the Gathering. I mean, I played other games before that, but Magic was what stamped me as a gamer before I even really knew myself as a gamer. The rest I get, and so yeah, Magic, but Lords of Waterdeep was really what, like, from that point on, I was a gamer. So with that, thanks for taking a long pause with Give Pause, and until next time, happy gaming. See ya.